Excuse me, would you like to show these still?
If there were time, tak it's no problem.
We don't have time. A lot of people would like to speak, but it's up to you to decide. You think it's important to show at this point?
This table is comparison in some aspects and different problems in Slovakia and Czech Republic. For example, material processing, sentencing offenders, rehabilitation, head office. If possible, I can see it. But I think that is not so important.
Okay.
Yes.
Discussion is going on.
Fine. Okay. Thank you very much. So, please then questions and comments. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we will have time for these 8 questions. Please start.
I just have a very quick suggestion for Saygun. I don't know if you know Cristina Vătulescu's book on narratives that are reflected in the secret. Is this working?
Yes.
In the secret archives in Romania. So she's teaching at in New York. So that might be something you want to take a look at. Then Olivera Simic has or Simic. She has a chapter in the book that I'm currently preparing with Nadia for Cambridge University Press. It will be published next year, and it's what's the title? But she's also talking about bodies and artistic expressions related to transitional justice. So you might want to take a look there. And I have a question for Tomasz. You might know the answer. I don't know it. In Ukraine, did victims of communist repression organize themselves in any kind of associations or organizations? Is there bottom-up pressure to keep the transitional justice and reckoning with the past on the public agenda? Thank you.
Can we collect a few remarks and then respond? Second.
Thank you very much. Saygun, I really liked your presentation. It was very thought-provoking. And generally, it makes me wonder if we also need to talk about coming to terms with transitional justice, not just with the past that transitional justice is supposed to be about. What you brought up about the different identities, like all the kinds of things that this person has been, right? And the one thing that was, or one of the things that was secret, because we don't know his other secrets, then comes to dominate everything. And I think that's one of the keys in many, many countries, that the idea is that those kinds of things, maybe because it's hidden and maybe because we think of hiding as kind of, you have to peel back layers, almost literally, of a person's body to get to that secret. That becomes the most important thing, as if people who have also been informers don't have the right to complex lives. I mean, similarly to how we often don't grant victims the right to be complex and messy. In this case and many, many other cases, it's the idea of if somebody's done one thing, everything else in their lives doesn't count. So in a way, the question would be, are there kind of archetypical stories to which those accusations link themselves to? I'm thinking about Faust, about the price paid, the contract that we don't see until we do see it in the end. Or is there anything else that makes this story so, so appealing in terms of literary and other artistic conventions? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, number 3. And you yes, please, yes.
Thank you. I will speak in Polish. Odniosę się, skomentuję króciutko.
I would like to comment on the presentation by Mr. Gökarıksel. There is a problem because there is a person with a long, rich life, eventful life. He did many things, most of the time good things, and at the moment, there is just one moment when there is an episode of his collaboration with the secret police. Understandably, as this person feels about it, and his family feels that it is unjust, that the whole biography is actually obliterated by this one fact, one episode perhaps. So a question arises, should such things, such episodes be revealed? It is a very controversial issue. Perhaps there was a taboo of collaboration with the secret services. Should it be overcome? Should it be revealed? But I believe it is the question which is not asked the right way. We should take the opposite view. Or let me put it like this. When the secret police looked for informers and encouraged people to collaborate, very often people were forced to collaborate. Or simply when the secret police recruited its agents, its informers by blackmail, incentives, temptation with certain things, it was like a pact with the devil. But a significant element of this pact, of this agreement in the recruitment phase, in signing the document, was nobody will ever know about that. It won't be revealed, like never. And the question arises, can we add legitimacy to this element that it won't be revealed? Whether the collaborator has the rights that this truth won't be revealed. So, is he worthy of this privilege? Does he have the right to keep the privilege? My answer is no. Let me explain it very briefly, a very brief argument. Namely, informing on people, informing to the secret police. Once again, let me refer to the Bible, and the Bible language is a sin against the basic value of the social life, which is trust. While talking to somebody I can trust, I'm talking to you and you are not going to the secret police to reveal the content of our conversation. This is very significant. So when we talk about basic values, this is my argument. But obviously, I do realize that if we reveal such an episode in somebody's rich, long life, it is connected with many moral dilemmas. But it is a matter of how we approach this in the public life. Will we allow his whole life to be overshadowed by just one episode? Oh. Yes, of course, there might be abuse of such situations, like by journalists. Perhaps it is how the mass media work. Historians sometimes have their sins, namely like denunciation or revealing for revealing itself. When you describe somebody as a secret agent of the secret services, not because he was a very important agent, very evil-doing agent, because very often these were like regular people, they did nothing wrong, but very often people do that because it is a well-known personality which had just one minor episode, even though this person was not a significant agent. What does it mean that somebody was a minor agent? What does it mean, a minor agent? It may mean that the information passed on were trivial. No, you can't assess that on the basis of the content of the information, but we can know certain things only from secret files, because we do not know. Without in-depth research, we cannot know. In 99% of cases, we will not know how the information was used, how it was processed, whom the information may have harmed. Sometimes it was very small bits of information that can be used by the secret services to do significant things against other people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nie przedstawiłem się, Krzysztof Persak,
Krzysztof Persak, the Institute of National Remembrance. Sorry, I've forgotten to introduce myself.
Yes. Jiří Přibaň from Cardiff Law School, from Prague, Charles University. Thank you very much. It was very rich, and I was struck by the fact that 25 years after the fall of communism, we're still talking about dealing with the past, not just as ethics of memory, which is absolutely important, and I think it is common to all transitions and all regime changes that victims have to get the voice. the problem with there are various layers of dealing with the past, and we are talking not just about legal frames of memory, but legislators' frames of memory. And legislator, it's always about politics and party politics. And, and there is an interesting clash between transitional justice, and we're using dealing with the past in order to make a move from authoritarianism to democracy. Yet, 20 years on, we are still talking about lustrations in the region, but it's not we as a nation, we as civic society, it's we as particular political parties. And my question to the panelists is, isn't it higher risk for democracy when people like Orban talk about lustrations, or what is a higher risk for democratization and democracy when dealing with the past becomes a matter of cheap ideological contest? This brings me to a second question. After all, despite all criticisms, wasn't it the best solution for dealing with the past simply to do thorough lustrations in early 1990s, simply ban former communist officials from justice, from police, from army, the Czech or German way, rather than handling it with the ethical, quasi-ethical talk like in Poland, like elsewhere, and we ended up with the institutes of national memory which are used by party politics.
I believe I have to respond to what was said by a representative of the Institute of National Remembrance. I'm a journalist. I have two remarks and two questions to Tomasz Stryjek, and especially in the context of the 5 factors to Professor Dudek. First of all, an important issue. When Tomasz, when they were commemorating events in Wolyń, where President Komorowski participated in the event. I also was part of the crowd there, and recently, during All Saints' Day, I went to Vilnius, and I talked to descendants who are researchers of recent events, like, let's say, grandchildren of historians, or simply they are themselves historians in Lviv, in Vilnius. They have very close links with Polish universities, former Polish University in Lviv and the Batory University in Vilnius. And Tomasz, I learned in Wolyń that now there are 4 Ukrainas, let me put it like this, and there are problems with identity. It is the Galicia part, pro-Polish, pro-European Union, Kiev, Rusinia, Seredina, with Chernomyrdin as the primary power and strong links with Russia. There is the 3rd Ukraine, Vostochnaya, supporting Yanukovych, strongly industrialized with monuments to Dzierżyński and Lenin. And there is the 4th Ukraine in Crimea. It is the Ukraine of Crimea and Tartars. So 4 Ukraines, and they manifest differently. They manifest different identities. So let me ask you a question. About your opinion, according to your knowledge, according to your research, is there any chance, as Professor Dudek was saying in the context of 5 items that he's discussed, is there a chance, is there a possibility that this game involving Yulia Tymoshenko may be beneficial for Ukraine? Or is it just a pretext? And now a question to Professor Dudek. It is like a question of a typical journalist. Professor Dudek, yesterday the press wrote that Archbishop Stanislav Wielgus and Professor Michał Czajkowski, who is also a priest, two very well-known figures were accused of being secret agents, but yesterday the press said it is not true. It is not true. It is mystification. It is a hoax. They simply signed documents while going abroad, signed the documents where they wrote that they would not slander the homeland. It was just that. So, what's your opinion? Because very often functionaries of secret services added to documents whatever they wanted. So it was not necessarily true what is written in the secret files. And you must know, Professor, that many priceless documents were burned after 1989, after June 1989. So it is not only a matter of minutes of meetings of the Polish United Workers' Party, and so many people were saying that this party was not a really workers' party, that they were simply servants of the Soviet Union. So it is a matter of importance to me. I studied Russian studies and Polish studies. I specialized I graduated from a special course at the Lomonosov Institute, and now we have a lot of knowledge about perestroika and what people say about Putin as a politician which is immune to any problems and is indefatigable. I read an interesting book about the German and Russian pollution of the European Union, contamination of the European Union. Former enemies, France, Germany, and Russia today are allies. They were former enemies. And the last remark on my part. Today, historians and academics talk about the following thing, that there is a differentiation between Russians and Rusynians. And in the other group, there are the Czech people, the Polish people, whereas Russians are descendants of Mongol people, the Huns, and they are tainted with chauvinism and nationalism. So there is a barrier, which is a new triangle between Kiev, Minsk, and Warsaw. But there is still Lukashenko in power. And as we know, there's Yanukovych and President Komorowski. So this political and military triangle between Minsk, Warsaw, and Kiev is impossible.
We have time for 3 more very quick interventions, please.
Hi. Well, I'll try to be quite quick. I have a comment and a question to Saygun. Well, I found the artistic performances being particularly disturbing to some points. So I would say that it encompasses very well what I would call, in very specific terms, dystopia, as this kind of movement or displacement. And what I see there is this form of displacement of the symbolic, a dissolution of the symbolic realm, which I think it's precisely related to the authoritarian/totalitarian experience in Eastern Europe. So I think that the artistic performance is very much related also to this complicated question of who is the grandfather as a figure of authority, who is the father as a figure of authority, which is the same, well, in Freudian terms, I would say, which is the same question, what happened to the law, or what happened with the whole symbolic framework during that time. And my question to you is, to which extent do you think that this artistic performance touches to some extent the political potential of disrupting the relation between the state production of truth. The state production of truth and subjectivity, because the archives it's precisely about this, the production of knowledge and of truth and of subjectivity of people, and to which extent this particular form of artistic performance may open the potential for a political alternative to this.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Alicja Czańka, nauczyciel historii.
I'm a teacher of history and methodological advisor in the 1990s. The first question, because in 1991 I was a witness of events in Ukraine, in Stanislav. I was there when there was the Janajew putsch. So my first question is to Tomasz Stryjek. How is it explained there that they make it difficult to have access to secret files? How do they explain it to historians? How authorities can justify that to historians? How do they justify it to victims? And the next issue is, did they ever have auto-illustration? Because when I was there in the 1991, there was huge enthusiasm after the Janajew putsch. I was quite surprised by that, by the extent of enthusiasm, because when we went to Zaleszczyki, there was the former palace of the Dzieduszycki's family. We were allowed to enter there because we are Poles. Wałęsa was the first one who announced the independence of Ukraine. So they were full of enthusiasm, and perhaps they were capable to have auto illustrations then. So why cannot they do that now? I want to say thank you to Saygun for your sensitivity, but it's just a peak of the iceberg, the top of the iceberg, because we know that Count Dzieduszycki was not a party member. He may have been a secret agent, but what about families of people whose family members were functionaries of the regime? What about ethics for these families? Because these people are trying to look into the future, and they may make important decisions for the younger generation.
Thank you. And now the last question.
Ja mam pytanie do pana Antoniego.
I have a question to Mr. Antoni Dudka, slightly corresponding to Mr. Terkowicz about files. In 1989, after the round table talks, there was a great burning of files, and with equal zeal and equal energy, new files started being produced. And my question to you, Professor, is as a question to a historian. To what extent what I'm saying is just a fiction derived from newspapers, and to what extent this is reflected in reality? You, Mr. Kaprowicz, you spoke about the clergymen who were slandered, but for instance, there was a file concerning our celebrity Violeta Villas, and two secret agents quoted some revelation to make her very guilty and make her look very guilty. To my mind, this was just fabricated. This was just a concoction. But I'm a journalist. I'm not a scholar. I don't have scientific instruments to verify the veracity of such documents. Would you know, Professor, something more about such artificially produced files? Maybe there are some repetitive patterns to be discerned. Am I right? Thank you.
And so can I write Professor Stryjek first to respond?
So, since I have the floor, let me take all of those questions and problems one by one. As Professor Dudek was saying, I take your point, but we have certain differences, maybe substantive differences, because the Czech Republic was not the only country where communists never regained power. Also, Estonia and Latvia have the same tendency, and I think that there is a clear dividing line between the communist parties representing the Russian electorate and the opposition parties. One more point on which I would tend to disagree with you. It was not so that the West would never encourage the post-communist countries in the process of EU integration to come to terms with their past. This was not explicitly requested of them. It cannot be demanded in a simple way as much as in the economic realm, but in the Baltic states, you would see it very clearly. There were committees, there were educational committees, there were expert committees in 1998 when the countries opened their negotiations with the European Union in order to come to terms with the past. We can also see certain impact on Romania. The committee set up by the incumbent President Vasescu was called into being just before their integration with European Union. So I would not say that there was no encouragement. I think there was an encouragement, quite a substantive encouragement, as we look at it. Now the question from Lavinia Stans about the social actors, NGOs, and so on in Ukraine. Did they manage to get organized, the associations of former victims of the Soviet regime? Well, truly speaking, I wouldn't say there are dedicated organizations. The victims' movement has been monopolized almost entirely by the former participants of the armed resistance in western Ukraine, where victims were really numerous. But they used to function in the clandestine underground state until early 1950s. And they participate in the project, identity project, as I put it, where a state is founded on the ethnical basis, and the state rejects Russians as such and rejects any alternative part of memory. Also rejects Ukrainians who speak Russian and who have Russian memories. So this is like a monopolization of a problem of Soviet crimes committed in the civil society. And the movement that is prevalent right now tries to commemorate the Ukrainian nationalism. Of course, there are prominent dissidents from the 1960s who are not related to the nationalist movement at all, but they are standalone individuals. Some of them function in the world of politics. Some of them are forgotten. And I think that this part of victims of the former Soviet regime is well represented by Vyacheslav Czarnowo, who stood as a candidate to the presidential elections, and he lost his life in the very curious and unexplained, unaccounted for car accident, something that President Kuchma then might have ordered and might have authorized. So this program is transforming itself into the program of a national ideology, and this is why you cannot achieve your objects because all the research into the past bears significant, increasingly nationalist features. And now briefly about Viktor Orban and the politicization and the party bias of a problem with the transitional justice contemporarily. I think that even if at the beginning the vetting, the lustration, the retributive justice was used so strongly, then in democracies in that part of Europe, we would have the same problem in policy, in party policy. Maybe the problem would not be as acute as it used to, but if we had this retributive justice exploited to the full of its potential, we would have no monopoly on the right side of the political scene for all the subjects related to justice, getting settled, coming to terms with the past. At present, there is a very strong overlap. Identity, nationalism, national identity comes hand in hand with the demands for getting settled. This is true of Ukraine, this is true of any other country in the region as well. Now, coming to your question, Madam, concerning access to archives in Ukraine, the picture is that there is a legal problem that is pending. Ordinary citizens will have access to files, but the files are like raw material. They have not been reviewed. They have been classified by the Soviets, and even if there are provisions of law stating that those classified documents from the communist era are now publicly available, they have not been processed. So I would say that kilometers of files have never been touched by archivists. They have never been scrutinized by archivists, and the managers of archives are afraid of revealing something potentially harmful to the state. Thank you.
These tables, the first minutes ago and just now is table of our oral histories. I think that it is all, and if you are questions, we can saying about it until tomorrow, because I am here for last.
Just very quickly, I cannot really answer all the questions, but I just wanted to say that actually Professor Antoni Dudek's comment on the West, or this kind of civilizational competence kind of a discourse said also by Piotr Sztomka, for instance, has been argued, is very, very important too. So the European Union also issues some standards to become how to, what they call, dismantle totalitarian regimes in a civilized manner. I think that's the name of the document. So can be very, very arrogant and pretentious in a certain way, and can be used and mobilized to basically blackmail for any voices which seek to come to terms with the past in one way or another. Actually, as you said, it is a very, very polarized sphere of politics, lustration, or the secret police files, secret service files. Every side basically calls each other of being a communist. So those anti-lustration groups call the pro-lustration groups as being right-wing Bolsheviks, whereas those pro-lustration groups call them as ex-communist or communist agents, or they have something to hide in their conscience. So it is a very problematic thing. I just wanted to underline that, and this has been with the comments too, the role of media which is very understudied, I think, in transitional justice literature in general. And this is extremely important because there is the truth in the archive. They are not really apples to be collected in the archive, that's for sure. But how does it become public? How does it get disseminated over the public? So what kind of actually procedure does it undergo in this publicization of that information? So it is so much to do with this, I would argue, in the post-1989 privatization and commercialization of media too. This tabloids, you get fucked, or you get, all kinds of, these kind of media institutions which wants to, milk this stuff, basically. And what I'd like to point out in this case is that, okay, these are like scandals or like these flashes, right? It comes and hits, but leaves people behind with this long procedure, and not everyone can afford to go to the court to resolve this business. And it is very difficult to resolve these things in the court, and by the time you think you did it, no one is interested in anymore because it's too late. It has already gone for years, and everyone really thinks that there's something wrong with you because someone accused you of this. So for the media, for the education part, I think that's also a well taken point by Antoni Dudek, and I think and also to answer Cosmi's point about whether it disrupts or not this performance. So that was actually the conclusion. It actually falls back on the very terms of the accusation. It only seeks to verify or confirm the newspaper's already allegations or the accusations. So it requires a broader consideration of that historical or field of historical knowledge production. Maybe a different approach to the files themselves and how this truth is produced beyond maybe the archives themselves, right? As we talked, like it was last night, the legal truth and historical truth, and like how the truth is a process that reveals itself all the time, and it has to be dialogic, it has to be dialectical. Yeah, and so yeah, I just want to cut here, I think.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much. I will also take only a few of your points because we are running late. Mr. Przybań, our guest from the Charles University, was asking whether it would not be better if vetting, if lustration were done in the early 90s, just after collapse of the communist system. This is the prevalent view in Poland, but it hadn't happened so. So this question is like a rhetorical question to me, because the bare facts are that those processes were not triggered off in the early 1990s. So we see like a ticking bomb that is left over by the communist special forces, and we have kilometers of unresearched files, and the ticking time bomb exploded decades after. Why was it left over? Why people in control would not do something obvious, namely destroy everything, destroy all the documents? Because if the documents would not be there, and it was technically feasible, in 24 hours you could destroy them all, but they didn't do so because special forces, secret forces, would not get rid of a very important tool in their operation, something that they have been tapping and are tapping until this very day. This is why they have not destroyed everything. If we compare what they destroyed and what they hid with what is available on files in the archives in the Institute in Poland or in peer organizations elsewhere, then the volumes of documents destroyed is negligible. Now, I would like to encourage you to read my paper on the Institute of National Remembrance and the authenticity of documents is one story, and the credibility of the information contained is another story. One of the journalists in this room asked me whether documents were artificially produced. Well, I only know of one instance where a document was artificially produced, but I think that the scale of this fabrication was very limited. It is not so that every victim is suffering from allegedly prefabricated charges. And Professor Stryjek, yes, you are right, you are right. I forgot about Estonia and Latvia, but the situation of those two countries is very unique, because the dividing line in those countries is not between the communist forces and non-communist forces. No, this is about ethnicity. If we had a Russian minority, Russian-speaking minority in Poland, assembled in one political party, this party would never gain power anymore. The pressure of the West, well, I'm not implying that there was no encouragement or pressure from the West. In Poland, this was the case of Colonel Kuklinski and his forced rehabilitation, which was demanded by the United States and was first unpalatable to the Polish political elites. But this was only a single case of Mr. Kuklinski, and in other cases, it was for the communists and the political elites to decide what they do. Thank you very much.
Panel starts at 3 o'clock.